Welcome back, everybody, from your lunch. I hope it was delicious. We're now going to speak to Bonaventure Bejeng Ndikung, who is unfortunately not able to join us in person, but promises to be in Calcutta soon. Bonaventure is an independent curator and biotechnologist. He is founder and artistic director of Savvy Contemporary Berlin with a kick-ass team, and editor-in-chief of Savvy Journal for Critical Texts on Contemporary African Art, and is guest professor in curatorial studies at the Stadelschule in Frankfurt. He has also been part of the Documenta 14 team as curator at large, and a guest curator of the 2018 Dakar Biennale in Senegal, and we are also going to hear about the project in Dakar. As part of the Miracle Workers Collective, along with a range of practitioners, Bonaventure is working towards the upcoming Pavilion of Finland at the 2019 Venice Biennale. We're going to actually begin with two clips, which he's going to introduce later. So two tracks, we're going to hear some music, and then Bonaventure will take over.
Unfortunately, I could barely understand anything.
We're going to play the two tracks of music now, and then I'm going to have you present. We're going to play one more track now by Halim Eldab. You play the
Slowly open your eyes and you can see the color on the screen and try to feel that.
start?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So should I just start?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. The two pieces you heard earlier were from Halim Eldab, one from 1944, which is actually the remake of the piece he did on the expressions of the Tsar, a recording he did of the Tsar chant, 1944, in Egypt, in the village close to Cairo. And the second piece you heard is called Canine Wisdom, from the album The Dog Done Gone Deaf from 2007, the live recording from a festival on music in Canada. So I would like to use this as a point up. I'm yet reverberations of myself, so it's a bit annoying. Is there a way to solve that?
Can you lower the volume on the computer?
Okay. I'll just go on. Natasha and I decided to take the sonic as a point of departure in my work as an exhibition maker for several reasons. One of which is the fact that I've been trying to look for other spaces of knowledge. And the sonic could be one of those very important spaces for me and for my practice as a person, but also for the work I do contemporary, looking at reading, I could start actually with a statement by from Noise, The Political Economy of Music, which he wrote in 1977, which I think many of you might be familiar with. And Jacques Attali wrote that for 25 centuries, Western knowledge has tried to look upon the world. It has failed to understand that the world is not beholding. It is for hearing. It is not legible. It is audible. So, if we, learn from that audible, how can we learn to perceive the world through the audible, through the sonorous, so that we will how to situate ourselves in the world. So I'm trying to take this as a point of departure, the possibility of understanding the world through that sonorous. I'll look at two examples from past year, from 2018 actually. One for the Dakar Biennial in Senegal, titled "Canine Wisdom for the Barking Dog," the dog done gone deaf. And in that exhibition, we're trying to look at the work or taking the work of Halim Eldab, this composer who passed on in 2017 in the US, born in Cairo. He died at the age of 96, as a point of departure with ourselves in the world. Interestingly, another very important part of my work has to do with remembering of possibilities of de-erasure. When Halim Eldab died last year, the New York Times wrote that Halim Eldab,
can you turn your video off?
Graham, has died. So I was saying that when Halim Eldab passed on last year, the New York Times wrote that Halim Eldab, the composer for Matter Graham, has died at the age of 96. Now, interestingly, they needed Master Graham to qualify Halim Eldab, which is something I find very interesting and takes me to the work of Leo Asemota, one of the artists we showed in Dakar. So in Leo Asemota's work, he presented 3 dictionaries of music. One from the late 60s, one from the early 70s, one from the mid 90s. And in all these dictionaries of music from the 20th century, Halim Eldab was written out of them. But you consider that Halim Eldab, to many of us, one of the most important composers of the 20th century, it becomes quite interesting as a possibility of reflecting on processes of erasure. So those interested in music will know that this composition we heard, the expressions of Czar from 1844, Halim Eldab implemented a technology that was later to become the technology of musique concrète. That was founded only 4 years after 1948 in Paris by Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry. So in my work on decanonization as a method, I've been looking at processes of de-erasure. How do we make some of these people that have been erased more visible, and thereby making the knowledge they brought with them also visible or audible in this context? So by looking at Halim Eldab's work, I was very much interested in looking at some theories that is deposited in the course of more than 8 decades of making music. One of which was Evolution and Decadence, you know, a composition he made in 1949, in which he looked at the evolution of sound and the decay of sound. But also the possibility of looking at harmony in friction. You know, Halim Eldab developed the whole theory of creating harmony in friction. Or we can look also at the meditation on white noise, which he did in 1959, you know, where he talks about the physicality, materiality of sound, you know. So talking about creating sound as a sculpture, you know, he talked about using the chisel to create the sound. So his instruments were the kind of a chisel. But I was also very much interested in reflecting on Halim Eldab's color notation system, which he developed based on an ancient Egyptian way of writing music, in which colors and circles help in the reading of music. So we had artists like Lorenzo Sandoval who developed on that, but also I was very much interested in looking at Halim Eldab's work as a musicologist and also as a music theorist. Some might know that he traveled not only the African continent in the late 50s and early 70s, and one of the things he did was, you know, visiting Léopold Sédar Senghor, who was then president in Senegal, and did recording compositions in Dakar. So the work we did in Dakar was a possibility of bringing back this sound, you know, this kind of experimental music to Dakar. And he also traveled to Ethiopia, where he worked on creating the national orchestra, you know. But also one very important part of his work is trying to link the African continent to the African diaspora, you know, so researching in Jamaica, but also in Salvador de Bahia, where he did the album Shango Cow. So all these possibilities, we invited artists like Satch Hoyt, Pungwe, Emeka Ogbo, and so on, to reflect on different possibilities, to reflect on the sound as Halim Eldab's sound as a knowledge system, but also particularly with the album The Doctor Gone Deaf, where he was reflecting on the relationship between the man and canine. So looking at these non-humanocentric relations. So and on that note for Halim Eldab, then I would like to speak a bit about Julius Eastman. So in the beginning of 2018, in March, we did a project called "We Have Delivered Ourselves from the Tonal," reflecting on the works of Julius Eastman. And I think Adam Chimchik can talk to you about that because he projects on Julius Eastman while he was in Kunsale in Basel. But have been working on Julius Eastman's work for a couple of years now. But last year, we decided to dedicate one whole year into researching Eastman's work. Because what became very evident, for my colleague Antonio Lampi and I, and also for the collaboration partner Ben Odopolsa, was that the work of Julius Eastman was often read on a very superficial level. So the that were played often, the more spectacular pieces like the gay guerrilla piece or the easy figure piece and so on and so forth, So I kind of had the impression that it was a kind of shyization of his gayness and his blackness, Not to say that they are not important, they are very important, but hardly anybody was really trying to understand the music and what he was trying to say with the music, So we took a year to research on this and to write about it. So the point of departure was trying to renegotiate a genealogy of minimalism or negotiating a genealogy of minimal music, so to say. So because the narrative of minimal music is that Lamonte Young on one beautiful day, 1958, composing trio for string, kind of invented minimal music, But we all know that Lamonte Young traveled to India just like, other minimalist musicians that traveled to Ghana and other places and were inspired by that, So the question is, how do we do a history of minimalism, and taking this into consideration? So what became very helpful for us was looking at the writing of Kofi Agawu, who wrote about minimal impulses in African music, So we're trying to understand this minimal music, not minimal music with a capital M, but minimal music with a small m, so to say. So it gave us the possibility of looking at reading his scores, looking at his choice of music, of instruments, and listening to some the very rare interviews he gave, So, for example, the talk he gave in 1980 in the Northwestern University before the concert, because when there was a huge protest before this concert with students, especially black students in the university, saying that it shouldn't use the word nigger in his music, and basically he took the time to explain why he was using these terms, and he said the idea of the nigger to him is that which is fundamental. So we're trying to look at this at the sociopolitical in Julius Eastman's work, So the idea of race, the concept of race, and in this discourse, he kind of connects this creation of race to the middle passage, So at that time when capitalism is being born, the construct of race is also being created, just as the construct of gender, So which is something people like Annie Batikano have written about, on the coloniality of power. And somebody like Maria Lugones on the coloniality of gender, So we're trying to look at these connections. So he in one of his pieces, Julius Eastman, he called the song "If You're So Smart, Why Ain't You Rich?" Which serves as a point of departure for us to reflect on the economy of knowledge. So we invited artists like Anika Pars, who did a piece called, a new commission called The Lord Loves Changing. It's one of his greatest delusions, you know, which is a statement that Julius Eastman used in the late interview. And what is spectacular about the piece is that Anika Tars takes on spirituality in French music. Another thing that has been very rarely written about. Because if you look at pieces like Buddha, which he composed in 1984, or The Holy Presence of Rwanda, which he did in 1981, even earlier pieces like Praise God from Whom All Devils Grow from 1976. You see that this guy was extremely interested in spirituality and the fact he was very well versed, very well read. So we're trying to read spirituality in his music, you know. So in two famous pieces, you know, Gay Guerrilla and The Holy Presence of Rwanda, he used a Lutheran song, which is often been used as a protest song, you know. So a very important song with the Protestant church. So again, nobody is written about it, you know, and we're trying to make this connection. Then we wanted to look at, you know, racial discourse in each work. You know, looking at compositions from 1978, like the dirty nigger or the nigger faggot, you know, so quite heavy terms, which he uses, you know, of course, to provoke a certain discourse on his music. So we were trying to dig deeper on that. But in this lecture he gave in 1980 in Northwestern University, he said something very important about being a guerrilla. He said he considers the gay guerrilla something, or he wished that they could be as strong as the PLO guerrilla. So he was looking at this as a kind of a debut of a movement, you know, so which is something we're trying to investigate. So we invited an artist like Batami Toko, who did a new piece called The Genius Figure. So trying to look at minimalism in drawing. You know, another thing very few people know about that Julius Eastman was also a painter. So we're trying to also make this connection between, you know, the painting and his music. Hassan Khan was another artist whom we invited to the show. It's a piece called Tainted, which could be understood as a kind of a monument of vulnerability, the position of the vulnerable artist. Then we invited Pungwe and Pungwe Knight to think of instrumentation, you know, trying to look at minimalism in the context, like looking at the Pira, what's called the tom piano. So yes, that's a short summary on the work we're doing on the statement. If you don't mind, I would like to say one or two words about a exhibition that tackles less the sonic, but kind of exemplifies the work with contemporary, which some of you saw. The work was called Whose Land Have I Lit On Now? So an exhibition on notions of hospitality, in which we try to look at Jacques Derrida's concept of hospitality and hostility, you know, which he calls the package between hospitality and hostility. So for this project, like we do kind of invocations at Tavi, where we invite, you know, people to give lectures, we invite music, a lot of performances, the possibility of looking at the body as the side of, you know, or thinking through the body. But exhibition departed from the, should I, can I continue?
Keep going.
Okay. the exhibition departed from the recent declaration of Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. So we took that as a point of departure to question what settler colonialism actually means and the kind of hostility that is kind of enacted upon settler colonialism. So these moments when the host is displaced and the guest becomes host. So the first chapter of the is called I Host, I Guest, Who's the Ghost? So in every settler colonial structure, the extreme violence that is enacted through language, through dispossession of land and property and resources, becomes an epitome of this hostility that's enacted upon hospitality. The second chapter is something that we're very preoccupied with in Germany in the past years, of the influx of people that have been termed, adopt refugees, people that have left their land, and are seeking for some greener pasture somewhere. And the sudden discovery of the German hospitality when Angela Merkel said, "Wir schaffen das." She said, "We will make it." Somehow, there was a kind of humanistic aspect in her statement. We will make it. So, 3 weeks after that, there was an echo from the public, from the citizens, from the press, saying, "No, we won't make it because the boat is full." So, as some of you remember, Arjuna Padurai once wrote a book called The Fear of Small Numbers, which we found very interesting because the question that came in was, how can a country of 82 million be scared of a few thousand people coming in? What is this fear of small numbers? So we took the point of departure to reflect on this relationship between the Schaffendas and the British people. What happens in this period? The third chapter of the project is what we call hospitality, which is the commodification of the notion of hospitality. So I come from a country, from Cameroon, where you have 40,000 refugees from Cameroon now in Nigeria, from the English-speaking part of Cameroon. But if you go to Cameroon, the first thing you see at the airport is "Welcome to the land of hospitality." So the question is, how hospitable is a country like Cameroon when 40,000 citizens are out of the country as refugees in the space of 1 year? So we wanted to look at the selling of the idea of hospitality, which you have in Airbnb culture and in hotels and so on and so forth. And the last chapter, which I want to mention before stopping and going over to the Q&A, is it's something I termed caressing the phantom limb. So because we've had, this year in Germany, we've had a minister of Heimat, a kind of a minister of home or home affairs. So there used to be a minister of interior, but that didn't suffice. So because the idea of Heimat in Germany is a very romantic idea of a space which no one is really sure that space doesn't really exist. A conceptual idea of a Heimat which is discussed year in, year out. So every year there is a kind of a conversation of who belongs to the German Heimat or who doesn't belong to that Heimat. So I propose that the Heimat is a phantom which is caressed every year. And so I invited Arjuna Padurai came to come help us to reflect this phantom limb, for which he gave 8 theses. One of which was that the migrant has to become an acrobat to be able to be part of the Heimat. Taking the example of the West African guy who had to climb 6 floors in Paris to save a white kid. because after that he was given the French nationality. So he had to become an acrobat. He had to perform that acrobatics to become a citizen. So again, this is in this discourse of this conversation of the pact between hospitality and utility. So I will end there for now and look forward to your questions. I must say, it's really a shame I can't be there. I really hate Skype talks. So maybe you noticed that.
Yeah.
I'll try.
Ours is on.
Is it on?
Can you see us?
I can see you. Can you see me?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Okay. So, again, I want to say sorry that I cannot be around physically and be with you and dance and think with you. But I hope I'll get an invitation one more time to come to India. Never too late.
Definitely.
So perhaps what we didn't touch on yet was also the model of the invocations and how the invocations are not simply a sort of tool of programming, but are actually enmeshed with the kind of act of de-erasure and our strategies to also assemble around and bring together the practitioners who have been collaborators in different ways of figures such as Eastman. And maybe to just sort of give one example, I mean, I was specifically also really moved by the commissioning of the hospitality suite. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about, or also invocations during the Eastman, like sort of that, the way that sort of, yeah.
I'll start with invocation during the Eastman project, you know. It was very important for us to get together people that have been working and researching on Julius Eastman's work, you know, because, I mean, when he passed on in 89, you know, the fact like 8 months after he passed on, so nobody knew he died. Nobody knew of his out. But from the very onset, there have been people like Mary Jane Leach that have been trying to get as much, because when Eastman, the early 80s, you know, he basically, you know, at some point, because there's a lot of talk about, you know, people throwing away his scores and so on and so forth, but he also did that himself, you know. He just didn't consider that of being important at some point. So he.
Okay, we need to turn the video off. Sorry, we need to turn the video off because it's a bit slow.
You maybe turn your video off again because it's a bit slow. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
Is it up?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, my. Okay, so another person we invited was Christine Rusiniak, who went on tour with Julius in 1974 with the SEM ensemble. So she was one who produced most of the photographs of Julius Eastman that we see out here, you know. So, I mean, she's a photographer that actually stopped doing photography sometime in the 80s, or you know, wasn't very prominent in the photography scene. So we invited her to talk about the tour, but we also invited Petra Kotik, who was a collaborator of Julius Eastman and who was TM Ensemble, who had a very controversial relation with Julius Eastman. But also people like E. Lewis, who also went on tour with Eastman, and was a brilliant, music scholar, So all these people came in, or someone like Kojo Eshut, who's been working on Julius Eastman's work and been teaching Eastman's work to students. So we're trying to approach Eastman from different perspectives, but it's also like have people perform. Someone like Ellen Michener, an incredible performance, on Eastman's work, Sophia Woody, one of Eastman's is the prelude to the presence of one act. Sophia Landberg. Okay, that's for the invocations. Invocations become the kind of extended space of the exhibition, because I do not really believe in this very static space of the exhibition space. So I'm trying to look at other possibilities. I've been thinking of conceptualizing an exhibition as a jam session for many years. So the invocations become that possibility of getting out of that physical space into another space of embodied practices.
Yeah, I
it
think,
is that.
just sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was thinking when you were talking about the exhibition also as a space for dancing, and remembering two things. One is, of course, Henry Lefebvre's rhythm analysis, which is something that we've both been looking at in different ways. Also, of course, corpo literacy, which is something that you built projects around, and it's also, I consider that corpo literacy is really something that is a kind of ongoing mandate for the way that Savvy works and manifests. And I was also reading this morning Amiri Baraka's sort of listening to some of his sort of songs, and there's one in which the lyrics, it's a worker song, and the lyrics go, "You was dancing, need to be marching so that you can dance some more later on." And I just found that another kind of invocation, right? And this sort of, this space of gathering that is as much about commemoration as it is about a kind of radical form of assembling beyond the institutional walls. And yeah, those were a couple of things, but if you could respond.
Totally, Natasha, totally. I mean, we can talk about rhythm analysis. It's a really wide topic. We have that shared interest. But when Naeem Mohammed was in Berlin recently, and he was talking about monuments, I kept on thinking about the body as a monument. So now, that as that space of memory, which is something we've been thinking about, in the past years, which you rightly call corporal literacy, So how can the body be read, which this is what Esiama Erobi said, that the body should be considered as a side of discourse, because knowledge is embodied, and even in many ways, I come from a culture of scarification, so even the way people write on bodies, for those bodies to be, for knowledges of the people to be remembered, So it's something that is very dear to me, and that actually informs vocations. So now the sonic then comes in there again, because you mentioned the hospitality suite, which we invited Jacques Ozil to do. Some of you might know Jacques Ozil is a legendary musician who did the famous Black Suite 1969. And so this year we invited him to help us think, you know, to help us up in the sonic.
Sorry,
are you there?
We lost you after you just the last sentence, basically, when you talked about how you commissioned him.
Okay.
To help, yeah.
Very well, but I would say I was talking about that composition at the hospitality. Did together with McGilmore, you know, which is again the possibility of reflecting on this. I mean, Jacques Cousy, besides being a musician, was also a professor of philosophy. So he used the work of Lévinas, Brisson, and Derrida, three men, to help us the complex relationship between the guest and the host.
Mm-hmm. Great. We're going to open up to questions. We have only a few minutes more because we're running short. We're running a bit late.
I want to see you guys.
Okay. Okay, if there are any questions, could you all come up front? Because then Bonaventure can see us. Might be nice for him. Can you see everybody?
And there's more. Good idea.
That's Adam showing you the audience. Which is all around.
Hello.
Moving in circular fashion. So, yeah, if there are any questions, then it would be great to also just maybe come up front.
Bona, it's me, Övül. I want to, thank you for bringing, what we are experiencing in Savi as like the lucky Berliners. A little bit here as well. I want to ask you about like the how do you see the transformation of the scene, because we have been discussing with Natasha that how Berlin is moving right now to another space, from a very homogeneous space to a more like heterogeneous and really like a space of multiplicity, maybe that it never experienced in its last 20, 30 years. And how do you read that? And how do you read, Savi is bringing certain methodologies to Berlin that we see also being repeated by certain major institutions. If you can really like talk about these interactions in the city and like how do you really read that transformation, it would be very nice. I think it would be like a good thing to add on top of the position that you were putting right now. Thank you.
Fantastic question. First of all, Savi is made up of 26 people. That's parts of the world that embody different technologies. We have biotechnology, we have different people. So what has been very important for us in the past 10 years has really been to find knowledge systems into Berlin. So they are by geographies, knowledge systems inform.
Well, we're going to have to turn off video again.
Okay,
Can you repeat the last sentence?
I've done that. So,
can you repeat the last sentence that
okay.
Because we lost it.
Okay, so I said this multiplicity of bodies at Savi of knowledge systems from different geographies, different genders, different ways of being in the world, you know. So you talked about our dear Glissant earlier, and one of the things that fascinated me about his work is when he talked about the diaspora. When he said the diaspora is a consent of not being a single being. So we're very much engaged with that consent of not being single beings. So this multiplicity of beings that come together and make Savvy, from the very onset, was interested in challenging a very unilateral, you know, kind of conversation that was built around a Euro-American axis. So it's true that you see, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, 10 years ago in Berlin, I couldn't imagine seeing, you know, Natasha Ginwala doing a show in the Hamburger Bahnhof, you know, or over doing a show in the Hamburger Bahnhof a few years ago, and so on and so forth. You know, so a lot has changed, you know, and that should be, one should acknowledge that and praise that. But we should also be very careful with, you know, the political structures in place, you know. My colleague Antonia Lampi likes to mention Maria Lind on this, on the idea of the brain and the idea of the muscle institutions. Now, we notice also that the muscle institutions, that in this case the big institutions, also, while they also find ways of you know, of getting into these discourses, are also engaged in possibilities of usurping. So the question is, how do we avoid being taken over? You know, we can engage in conversations, which are things we're doing with institutions like the Arsenal, the Berlinale, you know, working in collaboration with institutions like Metz Music of the Berliner Festspiele. But also sometimes you just see certain things we've been working on just taken over by bigger institutions. And then there is, you know, it's a very, very long history. There's a long history of the politics of not referencing, you know, which again shows a huge of intellectual disintegrity, you know, which I cannot applaud, you know, which, you know, if you want to work on issues of unlearning in a very small space like Berlin, you cannot avoid speaking about the work we've done on unlearning for the past 3 or 4 years, you know. So I accept that it is true that things have changed, but we have to go a step further than the symbolical values, you know, because again, you see, 4 institutions working on issues of decoloniality or decolonization in Berlin in 2018, but you ask yourself, what is this decolonization they're actually talking about? What is decolonial about what they're talking about? Who are the people making the program? You understand? Who are the people coming to see the program? You see, and what is the program actually? So we have to question these things on so many levels. So which is actually what has pushed me to write more about decanonization. You know, how do we avoid, you know, in bigger institutions, the muscle institutions using us for their purposes, with the possibilities of staying out of them and questioning them as well. Although I don't want to spend my whole life questioning institutions, I just want to do my own shit, you know? I don't know if that answers your question, but...
I especially wanted to refer this last case about the unlearning project, definitely. I mean, I really wanted to bring that up, so thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we've actually run out of time, but thank you so much for being there despite being far and not having the rest of the... Okay, everybody's asking where you are at the moment. Where are you right now?
I'm somewhere. let's let's just say not too far from the Mediterranean.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
See you.